Hi, welcome to RSJ Technical's Ask the Expert session on getting started in CDX. My name is Heidi Wittenborn, and I'm going to be helping you getting started with CDX today. So what is CDX? Well, it stands for Compliance Data Exchange. There is also a database managed by the US EPA with the same acronym CDX. Be sure you're dealing with the CDX run by DXC. That's the correct one. CDX is designed to collect and manage substance content declarations for any product in any industry, whether you're dealing with a laptop, a cell phone, a nail clipper, a thermos, a calendar, a clothespin, it doesn't matter. You can declare it in CDX. It's a global, standardized reporting method, and it allows data to be consolidated from tier to tier along a supply chain using consistent data standards at each tier. In other words, it transmits data apples to apples to apples instead of apples to bananas to steak to milk to chalk to cheese. It allows data from each tier in a supply chain to be added together to paint a complete picture of a particular product. It's used to report compliance status, and CDX monitors regulated substances around the world on many different lists, and you can even add customized substance lists to CDX if you need to. So what's it going to cost you to play the CDX game? Well, it doesn't cost you anything to register your company, to enter data, or to send data to a customer. If you need to receive data from a supplier or import or export data from CDX, the cost varies. It's based on the amount of data you're managing. You can find the cost for a license by going to CDX, Get Started, Materials Reporting, and then clicking on License Model to see the current pricing. One of the advantages, though, of CDX is once you've got your data in there, it belongs to you. You can use it to declare to any customer at any time about any particular group of regulations the customer is asking you about. Your first step is to register your company in CDX. You go to www.cdxsystem.com and click the CDX login button. This will bring up the login window, and you will see the register your company link in that window. When you click on the link, it opens this form. You'll want to fill in the form, completing every field with a red asterisk beside it. Those are all required. Also, please take a moment to click the consulting training partner and select RSJ Technical in the drop down. It's important to let DXC know that you learned about CDX from RSJ Technical. We'd really appreciate that you're doing that for us. Then click the Next button. A window will open giving you your initial login credentials. Be sure to make a note of those. This is the only time you're going to get them. It'll also explain to you how to complete the registration process and activate your company in CDX. It's pretty simple. You're going to get an email. You follow the link in the email. You do the whole click on the link thing. You've done it for a lot of different things. CDX is using the same sort of mechanism. There's no limit on the number of users you can have in CDX. So if you need 12 people or 5 people or 82 people to enter data in CDX for your company, not a problem. There's no charge per user. So everybody should have their own credentials. There's no reason for them to share credentials. You should have at least 2 users with a company administrator profile so they can back each other up. When you got your initial login credentials, when you registered, you were created as a company administrator. You can go in and create as many users as you need. The default profile is standard user. Any company administrator can create another user in CDX, including, as I said, creating additional company administrators. You simply log into CDX and go to the Administration User menu and then click on the Create User button in the window that opens. When you're ready to create a user, you'll get this form and you fill in all the fields with a red star. Those are required. The default profile is standard user, but you can change that authorization profile to create another company administrator. You can also create what's called a read-only user. A read-only user is exactly what it sounds like. They can log in and read the data, but they cannot touch or manipulate the data in any way. So if you have a manager's manager's manager who wants to see what's going on in CDX, you can create them as a read-only user. They can log in and browse around, but they cannot manipulate the data in any way. Once you have your user ready to go, you click Save, and CDX will pop up a message to you with that user's login ID. Make a note of it. You must communicate this ID to the user. CDX will not do that. What CDX will do is send an email to that user with their initial password. By separating the login ID communication from the password communication, CDX creates a secure way in which login credentials can be transmitted. They can't be captured because they're not passing along together. And you can repeat this as many times as you need to create as many users as you want. So you click Save, you communicate to that user, you go back to the search screen tab and click Create User again and just create as many as you need. So let's talk about some basic terms and concepts in the CDX data collection process. The first thing you're going to need to do is understand the data quality and content standards required by your customer. What do they want the data to include and how they want the data to look? Many customers are adopting the standards developed by the heavy equipment industry. Your customer is free to develop their own, but if they want a starting point without having to invent things from scratch, they can use these standards. So can you. At the CDX website, select Industries, Heavy Equipment, and scroll down to where you see the AEM CDX Data Guide button. Click on it, and you can download the PDF that has all the rules. If you are familiar with IMDS, which is a sister database to CDX, the data guide will look very familiar. It'll look a lot like IMDS recommendation 001. That's because IMDS for the automotive industry has many, many years of data collection experience under its belt, and they've encountered a lot of issues and resolved them. So they were a good starting point for a new set of data quality rules for CDX. If your customer hasn't established these guidelines, they're a good place to start, and you might even recommend them to your customer. In CDX, you're going to create a model of your product. You're going to mirror your product virtually the way it is in the physical world. You want to identify materials and substances. Basically, you're trying to identify every substance in every material, in every component in your product. If you make a material, that's really easy. All the substances in the material. If you make a complex assembly, that's treat each item in that assembly separately, find out everything about each one of those, and then stick them all together as a data record the same way you stick them all together to make your assembly. The basic process is to gather the information about what you need to put into CDX, your product. It could be a part, it could be a material, could be a number of different things. You'll need drawings, you'll need material certifications, you'll need the BOM or bill of materials. If you need to collect data from suppliers, you'll need supplier contact information. Go about getting all the information you need and then build your item in CDX and submit it to your customer. Your customer has the option to accept or reject your data. If they accept it, you're good to go. Wahoo, your process is complete. If they say, yeah, no, I reject, I don't like what your data, and they ask you to make some changes, that's fair, they're allowed to do that. Be sure you understand what your customer is asking for. It may not be the right thing to do. Just because they're the customer doesn't mean they know more or better about CDX than you do. I have had over the years customers ask me to do all sorts of things to data I've submitted to them. I had one customer ask me to switch the data out entirely and use a different data record. And I asked them why. I said, I sent you really great data. It was accurate and truthful and exactly what is being provided to you in the real world. And they said, but we always use this data over here. And I said, but that data isn't right. It's not accurate. I can't do that. And they went, ah, we didn't really realize what we were asking people to do. And they accepted the data as I'd sent it to them, or accepted it when I resubmitted it. So the customer is not always right. You need to work with your customer to get the best quality data moving forward. CDX is basically a pyramid going from the lowest tiers in the supply chain up to what we call the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer. This is the company facing the regulatory authorities in a given market. They're the ones having to declare their product and prove it is compliant and legal to sell in that or provide in that market. It is possible for data to flow all the way along the supply chain from the lowest tier to the OEM and have the OEM reject the data for some reason. And it'll flow all the way back down the supply chain until it reaches the company that originated that data, and they have to deal with fixing it. There's an obligation and an expectation that every tier receiving data along the supply chain vet that incoming data before they accept it. The goal is to have the best quality data traveling along the supply chain and minimize reworking the data. It is just as painful and expensive to rework data as it is to rework a physical part. So the pyramid links data from tier to tier, but it does protect supplier identities from subsequent tiers. The relationship between a supplier and customer is protected. Your customer can see who you are. Your customer's customer, your customer's customer's customer cannot. The data as it's passed along, the supplier information is hidden from all but the immediate customer. What is passed along are the substances, materials, semi-components, and components that make up the material declaration. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about what all those things are. The first term you need to understand in CDX is MDS, or Material Data Sheet. This is the collection of data elements that describe your item in detail. Think of it like a container with a lot of different parts inside of it, or a cabinet with a lot of cubby holes. Some of the cubby holes you're going to put stuff in, and some of them you're not. Use the parts of the data record, the MDS, that you need to describe your part. Because CDX is so flexible and designed to report any kind of product, there are parts of the MDS you will never need, and there are other parts that you will use every single time. There are two types of items within an MDS. You have nodes, which are line items created in the moment in that particular MDS, and they exist only there. And there are references, which are other MDSs floating around in CDX, and we'll talk about where they come from in a moment. And you're going to refer to them. They are reusable over and over because they exist as their own MDS, and you're going to refer to them from inside your MDS. We have components. These are items or articles. They have a shape that determines their function. They have a particular weight. For example, looking at all these different articles, if you look at the bolt that's pictured here, that bolt could be made of steel, aluminum, brass, plastic. Not too concerned about what it's made from compared to my concern about, is it the right length? Is it the right diameter? Is the thread spacing correct so that it will properly thread into the nut? Will it fit in my assembly and do what I want it to do? That is the most important thing. Now, when you're building stuff in MDS, you can stick different things to different things. A component may be the parent of another component, a semi-component, or a material in the data structure. We also have things called semi-components. A semi-component doesn't have a fixed weight. It's measured by length or area or volume, and we use some portion of it. These are bulk materials. As you're looking at all the things pictured here, look at the spool of wire. Think about the fact that from one end to the other, if I were to pull all the wire off of that spool, it would be exactly the same no matter what section I cut. And I'm going to cut some portion of that wire off the spool to use in my assembly. Then it becomes a component. It has a fixed shape. In this case, it has a fixed length if it's a piece of wire. I wouldn't use the whole spool. So semi-components are things that require further processing before they are used. A semi-component may have a semi-component child or a material child. It may be attached to a component or another semi-component in the tree structure. One really important thing you need to remember is that semi-components and subcomponents are not the same thing. There is no special class of things in CDX called a subcomponent. Subcomponent is merely a term of convenience we use to indicate that a component is not at the top of the assembly. It's somewhere down in the assembly. A semi-component is an entirely different thing. When you receive data about a component and everything below it is a semi-component, that might be right. It's entirely possible it's correct, but it is extremely common for it to be wrong, and people have confused semi-components with subcomponents. And so instead of having a component with a bunch of component children, you have a component with a bunch of semi-component children, and it's not correct. So be sure you understand what you're looking at. Then we have materials. Materials are mixtures commonly made up of substances, but it's also possible to have a material made of other materials. For example, if you're looking at what I have pictured here, you see the buckets of paint. If you go to the local big box store and pick out your favorite color and ask the person at the paint counter to make it up for you in exterior latex, they're going to grab the bucket of exterior latex base, which has no colorant, and they're going to put it in their machine, push some buttons, put in the right code, and voila, all the pigments are dispensed into the base. They shake it up, and you have a bucket of paint in the exact color you picked out. And no matter which drop of paint you look at, they're all exactly the same. They are homogeneous. Every bit is the same. Material is about composition. It is not about shape. For example, look at the metal ingots pictured here. They could be drawn into a wire. They could be melted and poured into a shape. They could be beaten into a sheet to be used. But it's about their composition more than their shape, much more than their shape. Materials can be the child of another material, a component or a semi-component. They can be the parent of another material or a basic substance. Finally, we have basic substances. Everything is made of substances. A substance can be a chemical element like iron. It can be a molecule like polyethylene terephthalate, such as we have uh, pictured here, and that's made of several different elements. All the substances available in CDX are controlled by CDX. You cannot add a substance on your own. If you can't find what you need to describe your material, you will have to reach out to CDX through the substance request mechanism built into CDX and ask to have the substance added. Substances can only be attached to materials. There are generally three categories of substances. We have CAS numbered substances. CAS stands for Chemical Abstract Service. It is a unique number that signifies globally a particular substance. For instance, iron has the CAS number 7439-89-6. I can Google that CAS number and Google will tell me that's iron. I can ask Google what the CAS number is for iron and it will tell me 7439896. CDX also has what are called pseudosubstances. You can think of them as like generic substances. They don't have a CAS number. They may actually represent more than one substance. For instance, acrylic resin. There are a number of acrylic resins. They each have their own CAS number, but I don't want to tell you the specific one I use. That's giving away the secret sauce. So I'm just going to tell you it's an acrylic resin. That's good enough. There are also things called jokers or wild cards. These do not define a specific substance. They can be used to stand in for any substance that is not declarable or prohibited. You find them in CDX by entering system into the CAS number field when you're searching for a particular substance. Be sure it is in lowercase when you enter it, or you won't find what you're looking for. The example shown here, miscellaneous not to declare, is just a phrase. It doesn't stand for anything. You're basically saying, there's some stuff. It's made of something. You're not really telling anybody anything. So I mentioned we had declarable or prohibited substances, and you can't hide those. You can't use a wild card to, you have to show them. A declarable substance is one that's on a regulated substance list. If it's on one of the lists that you're concerned about for the markets you're dealing with, then you must show it in CDX. Many declarable substances have a threshold below which you don't have to report if you have less than that amount. It is a good idea, however, to go ahead and put it in because, regulations change. That threshold could change. It could get lower. If you've declared the substance because it's on the list, regardless of the amount, you're good. You don't care if the reporting threshold changes. You reported it. There are also prohibited substances. A prohibited substance is first declarable and second is limited in some way. You may not be allowed to have above a certain amount. You may only be allowed to have it under certain circumstances. Often there is an exemption provided that says, in this case, you are allowed to have more than the prohibited amount present. There are different substances on different lists. There are some substances that nearly every market in the world has on their lists, like lead or mercury. You can determine if a substance is on one of the regulated lists you're interested in by picking a filter in CDX. So when you first open up a material and look at it, you can see everything is in blue. There's no filter selected. It's just saying, here's the list. Now, if I select a filter, in this case, I selected the EU REACH candidate list for SVHCs, suddenly lead is red because lead is a REACH candidate list SVHC. It is declarable. I must show it. If I pick a different filter, different substances are marked red. If I choose GADSL, which is the Global Automotive Declarable Substances list, I get both copper and lead showing up as being on the list. Now, I happen to know that the GADSL has both declarable and prohibited substances, and that copper is declarable, but lead is prohibited. There are limits on how much lead you can have in materials that go into cars. So you need to understand the lists you're concerned about, and you need to understand what those lists tell you about given substances. Are they declarable? Are they prohibited? Are there circumstances under which they are allowed beyond the prohibited amount? Now, where do I get these MDSs? Well, I can make them. They can be internally created. There are standard MDSs provided by CDX for a lot of materials that are manufactured to a public norm or standard. Most of the time, these are metal alloys or platings because there is a lot of global agreement on what goes into a particular grade of steel or a particular type of plating. If the material is available as a standard CDX MDS, and the MDS as shown in the system accurately represents the material as you get it or make it, then you can use the standard. In fact, you're encouraged to, instead of creating your own or getting one from your supplier. And it's so much easier if you don't have to keep making all your data or collecting all your data. And finally, you can receive data. Someone else can create an MDS and send it to you. CDX includes some little extra icons next to everything. You have a house for internal, a globe for those that are standard and globally usable by anybody in CDX, and an envelope indicating the data was sent to you. Now, you're sitting there going, wait, I can't tell you everything that's in my material formulations. Those are trade secrets. That's proprietary. CDX recognizes this, and there are strategies in place to help you protect proprietary data. And if you use them all, you can really do a number on protecting your data while still declaring what you need to declare. First, you can use percentage ranges. Don't tell me there's 6.832% of substance A in your material. Tell me it's somewhere between 6 and 8%. Good enough. But I still don't know exactly what's in your formula. I just know you got some substance A. And when I'm calculating and determining my compliance profile, I'm going to use that 8% value, the Y value. In the worst case, if there's 8% in this material, am I okay? Am I compliant? That's the question I need to answer. I can also hide some of the substances completely, just not show them at all. Now, CDX does not set a specific amount you can hide. The AEM data guidelines I suggested to you do, and that percentage is 10%. Again, this is based on the long years of experience that the automotive industry has had with declaring substances and materials while still protecting proprietary formulations. And they've come to the conclusion that 10% works. So I'm going to use some percentage ranges, and 10% of the stuff I'm not going to even tell you about. I can enter it into the database and mark it confidential. There's a box you check. And if I do that, as the data is passed along the supply chain, the substance is not shown. Instead, CDX shows confidential substances, X%. I don't know if that's one substance or 10 or 15. I just know that there's some substances there, and there's a certain percentage of them that I can't see and I'll never know what they are. Now, the reason you want to do that is that, remember, CDX is managing and monitoring all these global regulated substances lists. If you've marked something confidential because it wasn't declarable when you made the data initially, created your MDS, and it becomes declarable, CDX will let you know. You've got something you've got to unmark and no longer be confidential. It'll manage it for you. You can, of course, replace things with a wildcard and just not tell the database, not tell anybody. But that means you're going to have to manage outside of CDX all of the substances in all the materials that you used a wildcard for. And if one of those becomes regulated, you're going to have to realize that and correct your data accordingly. And you're going to have to manage this for years. How long will your product be on the market? How long will it be in use? At what point in time might someone come back and say, I've got a problem. Your product was harmful to people or harmful to the environment. And you're going to have this data to be able to say, no, it wasn't in there, not me. That means you're going to have to manage that data outside of CDX. And that's a big job. And you got to manage it over a long period of time. Now, if you choose the 10% or whatever percentage you use, you're going to add together your confidential substance percentages and your wildcard percentages and the Y values. If you're doing percentage ranges from X to Y, the Y values cannot add up to more than 10%. That could be 0 and 10, 10 and 0, 5 and 5, 8 and 2. You can do the arithmetic to tell if your Y values add up to more than 10%. Finally, you can use a pseudo substance. I'm not going to tell you what epoxy resin I'm using. I'm just going to tell you I use some epoxy resin. If you use all of these strategies in combination, your formulation is well protected and you have still managed to make a compliance declaration to your customers. So how do you build an MDS? Well, you go log in and you choose MDS new, and you pick a component, a semi-component, or a material, depending on what you want to make. There are other things you can make in CDX. We're not going to talk about them. You can also choose to use the little new icon and get the same options. So once you open the MDS and are ready to start, you're going to get a screen with a lot of data elements on it. Remember those cubby holes? Some of them you need, some of them you don't. And exactly what cubby holes, what data elements are available to you depends on whether you're building a component, a semi-component, or a material, because there are different things to say about each one. When you are building your tree structure, you can use these buttons shown here to add to your tree structure, add a component, a semi-component, or a material. You can either add a reference or a node. Remember, a reference is an existing MDS, either internal, received, or standard. A node is an item you're creating in the moment on the fly. You're busy building something in CDX and you suddenly realize, oh, it has that bolt in it, and I haven't built that bolt in CDX. I'll just build it right now. So you add a node and you build your bolt and you go on your merry way. But guess what? You use that bolt in 14 assemblies. And if you don't build it as an MDS, it's not reusable. So go ahead and make it on the fly. That's fine. But then stop a minute and make it as an MDS so you can use it in the other 13 assemblies. Next, you're going to complete the supplier data tab. This describes your company. You're going to have to designate a contact person. You can have more than one. You designate someone as a contact person in their user profile. There are several types of contact persons. One person can be all those types. You can have different people for each type. You can have multiple people in each type. Mix and match as you need to for your company. Then you're going to complete the recipient data tab. You're going to click the little plus on the house and add a recipient. You can add more than one. Each recipient will get a details screen that is just for them. You're going to fill in their customer description or item name. You put yours on the ingredient tab, you put theirs on the recipient tab. Same with the part number. And finally, do click the forwarding allowed box. Forwarding allows the data you send to a customer to be forwarded to their customer without any change. Think of a distributor. They buy a part and they sell a part, or buy a material and sell a material, but they don't actually do anything to change the material or part, so they don't do anything to change your data. If forwarding is allowed, you can send the data to them and the distributor then turns around and sends it to their customer. CDX will make the data look like it's coming from the distributor. They will replace your data on the supplier tab with the distributor's data, again, protecting the relationship between you and the distributor. Then you click Send to submit the data to your customer. If you are adding multiple recipients, you will use Propose instead of Send. CDX will not even let you choose to propose. Excuse me. The reason it does that is because when you tell CDX to propose, it knows it's got to manage conversations between you and several different recipients at this about the same data. Don't worry, each recipient only sees their information. For them, it's a one-to-one send to receive. For you, it's a one-to-many. You see all the recipients you sent to. You can send to them simultaneously. You can add them one after another over time. This is the way you should manage selling the same item or sending the same data to multiple customers. Do not create an MDS for the same item for each customer. If you have 100 customers for your bolt and you create 100 MDSs for that bolt, if something about that bolt changes, maybe a substance that wasn't regulated becomes regulated, you change a plating. If you've made 100 versions of that bolt, one for each customer, You got to fix 100 versions of that bolt. If you've made one version and sent it to 100 customers, you got to fix one version, click propose, and all 100 customers get the information at the same time. So much simpler. So I've told you a lot about CDX, and I bet you can tell you I haven't told you everything you need to know. I've gotten you started. There are some good resources on the CDX website. Go to Resources, Supportive Material, and you'll find First Steps, which are short instructions about how to do specific things. There's a user manual you can download. It's available in multiple languages. Pick the one that's most comfortable for you. There are also some video tutorials about how to do certain things. And finally, there's some white papers discussing various regulatory issues and reporting requirements. And of course, there's one big resource you can always rely on, and that would be RSJ Technical Consulting. We support CDX for all tiers in the supply chain, whether you are a material manufacturer or an OEM, whether you're a large company or a mom and pop. We'll help you out. We offer turnkey data collection and management. That means you just say, RSJ, do CDX. I don't want to think about it. And we'll take care of it for you. Now, if you do CDX internally, but every once in a while you just get something weird or you have a problem or you're not sure how to do something, we have our priority technical support. You can call us or email us and we'll help you work through it. Finally, if you are doing CDX internally or want to do CDX internally or need some new staff trained to do CDX, we offer training classes. You can go to an open enrollment one, or we can do one customized just for your company and what you need to do in CDX. So if you need us, and we hope you do, contact us at sales@rsjtechnical.com, and we'll be glad to help you out. Thank you so much for your time today, and stay tuned. We'll be having more Ask the Expert sessions on various aspects of CDX, as well as on IMDS if you happen to do that too. Thank you.